thanks so much for coming and for tuning in to Art Werger's Artist Talk at the Riffe Gallery. Art's work is currently featured in our exhibition Duo Trio, which is a series of diptychs and triptychs by 14 Ohio artists. That exhibition will be on display until April 13th, so if you haven't been, you should definitely stop by and check out the exhibition. So, Art, take it away.
Thanks. Thanks for coming out. This is going to be an informal kind of talk. I've got my website up and we're referencing some things, but I wanted to talk about basically my approach to image making and a little bit about process, though not to get bogged down in process, because I work in a very convoluted manner, which is working in etching. And it's a very old process, first really perfected by Rembrandt, and I'll never get to that level. Nobody has ever gotten to Rembrandt's level of accomplishment in the medium. But I do work it in different ways, and the things that are going on in the broader field of printmaking are just astounding, broad and varied approaches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my approach in the works in the gallery and referencing some things on the website. What we're seeing up here projected is my latest large series, which is a 4-panel presentation of a 360-degree panorama of beach erosion. The things that I've been working on are, over the last 40 years, are all in the field of printmaking, all in the field of etching and intaglio printing. Intaglio includes non-acid techniques, but they're all made on copper plates. And so the advantage of spending a lot of time drawing on copper is that once it's done, it can be printed more than once. You can have a multitude of things. So that's part of the allure of working also in the diptych and the triptych, the format of having a multiple. So for me, the diptych or triptych is a compounded compositional problem, or a compounded story. It's like chapters in a book. So each image is a standalone chapter or short story, which should hold up on its own, but then put into context of a second or a third or even 6 images, as we have here, it becomes something bigger, more panoramic story, a more encompassing story. My background originally is in, well, rooted in drawing, but I started in illustration, and you'll see a lot of that goal of illustration or storytelling in the way I approach the work as well. I think of it as illumination, of starting with darkness, and often what I'm doing is working with a dark plate and bringing light to it, and that light is illuminating about the story as well. One of the other themes that I work with is my fears, sort of conquering my fears, my phobias. So I will work a lot with aerial images. I have a fear of falling. I guess everybody has a fear of falling. Well, it's not really a fear of falling so much as a fear of landing. But I think everybody experiences that to some degree. And so for me, there's an anxiety in the drawing. And the problem for me with representational images is that they can be static, or they can be pretty stiff and still. And so I try to capture moments which imply something happened before and something is going to happen after. And we've captured perhaps a key moment, like the photographer Henry Cartier-Bresson would say, the decisive moment. So this is the moment when things have aligned just so that the composition is perfect, whatever that means. It's an aesthetic thing, but I'll spend many weeks just arranging compositions so that they look totally unarranged, totally casual. Deciding to move something a little one direction or another becomes a very major factor in trying to make the final image as balanced as possible. So I'll go through a couple of different bodies of work here to show my overall approach, and these are all in intaglio, or as I said, etching on copper. Intaglio is just a slightly broader term, which includes other techniques like mezzotint, which is a hand-done technique, no acid involved, and dry point, which is direct scratching onto copper. So I mentioned that my work involves phobias or fears, and one of those is of drowning, of being underwater. And so this series, which is about 20 years ago now, and lasted about 10 years altogether, started with underwater scenes of my children as they were learning how to swim, and then became a little bit more abstracted as I started to deal with the figure, the body, but also the reflected abstraction as that body dissolves. So the figures are mostly anonymous, and that way they are universal, and they also become somewhat symbolic. So these are titled Venus, Psyche. Krishna is the third one with the multiple arms due to the reflection. And the Graces, which is kind of based on Botticelli's La Primavera, and the three Graces, the floating figures in diaphanous gowns who aren't really standing on the ground, they're angels, so they're sort of floating. And the three figures in the right piece are doing that same sort of hovering or floating. These pieces are partially a reaction. Let me see if I've got any others on here. I don't think I do. I don't have the horizontal pieces that I started with. The first ones I did were more of a panorama of being submerged when you're in this space. And they were figures swimming. And so I did quite a few pieces like that. And then I thought this was a really original direction for me. I was making etching look like something other than etching. I was taking it in a different direction, more like watercolor or pastel. And I was really enjoying that. And then I opened an art news magazine and saw work by my former painting teacher. And it was underwater swimmers. And they were so much better than the ones I was doing. It's like, I thought I was being very original, and I was just perhaps reprocessing ideas that other artists had done as well. I wasn't consciously aware of the work, but there was a similarity. And so because of that, I went from the swimming figure, the dynamic movement, into a more still image where the figures are vertical and working more with the patterning of the color, developing the color through elaborate etching processes, working with the reflections and the patterns on the bathing suit primarily.
Did that start, you took photographs then?
I always start with photographs, yeah. And I use photographs as references, but my photographs are never meant to be finished works of art in themselves. They're just a way for me to begin to process and reinterpret things. So yeah, often people will look at work like the 6-panel piece here in the gallery, and from a distance think they might be photographs, but hopefully I'm not sure at what level exactly, but at some level you realize this is a hyperreal in a different way than the photographic image is, and so it becomes a different filter on something which is believable as a shared experience. But it's important to me that it not be too photographic and take it a little bit.
There have been a lot of people standing in front of it with giant question marks. What is it?
And you've had to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, this helps a lot.
I apologize for that. Let me go to a different series here. The cities are mostly aerial views, and these are a bit dark. I don't know if we can. So yeah, we can see them pretty well, hopefully, up here. Most of these projects are very intricate, and so they tend to last, in terms of how long it takes, it tends to be about a year for each piece. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing I'm working on for that year, but from beginning to end, the whole process can be about a year. And so for each piece, I try to find something that I can really devote a lot of time with, really live with for a long time, and maintain my interest. And that's always a bit of a challenge. So in these city scenes, it's all about the light, the glow, and again, the aerial feeling. So this is a sort of an omniscient narrator approach. If you're a writer writing a story, it might be seen through the omniscient narrator's voice, the character who sees and knows everything, which would be impossible in a real-world situation, but gets inside of the characters' heads and has an objective point of view to tell the whole story. So by assuming a distanced approach, a distanced angle, I'm trying to provide more information than would normally be provided through a standard window horizontal approach. And so we're looking down, we're seeing the fronts of the buildings, we're seeing the tops of the buildings, and we're seeing little stories taking place inside of different fragments of it. Part of this is intended as a cinematic approach. Many movies will start with an aerial view, and that sets the scene. And then the camera starts to move in a little bit closer, and we start to get attracted to one moving individual, perhaps, and that becomes the main character in the movie. So I'm hoping that with some of these pieces that they work in a similar way. As you walk into a gallery space, you're seeing the overall location, the overall scene, and then as you approach, you start to see, well, there's something going on in here. And you bring your own background to whatever I've provided as a spur for the story, and you have to create your own setup and conclusion, perhaps. So I tend to try and create a bit of a loaded narrative and leave it up for the individual to complete the story. So these are all concepts about, how is representational artwork still relevant? Because it's questionable. In the age of photography for the last 150 years, in the age of movies, we see so much glitz, movement, noise, action, adventure, and then to present something in a still picture, how do we provide renewable closure so that you don't just look at the picture and get the entire concept at once, but you have to come back to it and see something different each time. So hopefully there are different things in it to be provided for each time you experience that work and get a little bit something different out of it each time. And I think there's a correlation between the amount of time that I put into a piece and hopefully the amount of time that somebody can spend with that as well. So when I work on something for a year, it's kind of loaded with meaning, levels of meaning, as well as technical surface attraction. And my intention is that you can always find something more to keep your eye and mind entertained with it. So these different series are all etchings or mesoprints, also intaglio printing, and they reflect a long period of my career going back to graduate school is when I first started doing aerial views and when I first started doing multiple panel pieces. And so it's kind of a little disarming sometimes to look back at work from 40 years ago and realize that I'm still doing the same thing. I haven't really changed that much, but maybe that's because what I'm doing is really, truly at the core of what I'm interested in. I grew up in suburbia right outside of New York City, so a lot of my images deal with the suburbs as sort of an isolated and unescapable situation. And the city is sometimes alluring and sometimes menacing. So those are sort of my basic takes on these different themes. This piece here is called Diversity. You get the option of slightly different colors and slightly different windows, I think, with each house. And sometimes there's a little bit more storytelling going on, as in what's going on with the characters playing in this one. One of my real inspirations has always been Alfred Hitchcock. So there's a voyeuristic level to my work and a sort of a building of suspense, hopefully. So thinking back on the urban scenes, one of those was entitled Vertigo, a clear nod to Hitchcock. And he's such a great film noir kind of director that I take that approach in a lot of the darker images as well, so that it's basically a dark scene, and then it's selectively lit to show or illuminate those areas of the story which are really important. This piece is a two-panel image, a diptych, 1986, going back a couple of years. And this one is called Neighborhood Watch the Secret. This is after first moving into the suburbs for the first time. And being part of a community, not feeling quite sure about what that meant in terms of security. In this scene we have to the left side some sort of a brawl occurring under a street light and a group of people who are sort of stumbling towards that goal. Those people are based on one of Bruegel's pieces, if you know Bruegel's work, the blind leading the blind, where they're all sort of stumbling into a gutter. And so what are these people going to do? Are they going to separate these people who are getting into an altercation, or are they going to exacerbate it into something bigger? Then there's little sort of Hitchcockian window scenes, people talking to each other on the phones, people writing stories, typewriter, and so each little vignette is a kind of a rear window intrusion on the privacy of the home. But again, it's an omniscient narrator. They're not aware that they're being watched. Where are they being watched from? Is it a surveillance helicopter? Is it the eye of God? Is it both? It could be whatever you want it to be. The landscape has been a recurring theme for me, and I do, in addition to these etchings, I do a lot of drawings on site. I'll just take a sketch pad and go out and draw for an hour, 2 hours. I think that's really important to counter the work that I do from photographs, to keep my process more active. So these are not specifically landscapes here, but down in the bottom we have a couple of different landscape scenes, a West Coast and an East Coast scene. And so the theme of the landscape is sort of a separate piece for me. I've done probably thousands of on-site paintings and drawings over the years, but really what it comes down to for me is the places where water meets the beach, or where water meets cliffs. This place where these two things collide. And there's something about those forces at play that has been a recurring theme for a long time. Part of it might be related to the process of etching. Etching is made by liquid eating away at metal. So it's liquid eating solid. And that's what the forces of the waves, the forces of the oceans are doing to the land as well. Now, another specific aspect of my work is the mezzotint. And this is a very peculiar process, which I don't want to confuse with, but it's a very time-consuming process. It's the oldest process, the first process that was used to make tonal images in a reproducible medium. Before lithography, before aquatint and etching, before halftone photography, if you wanted to reproduce a tonal image with values, the first thing was mezzotint. So mezzotint was invented in the 1600s, and it's a process where you take a copper plate and you take a toothed tool and dig into the plate, and it makes pits. And those pits hold ink. And you rock back and forth in 24 different directions, taking many hours to do a plate this size. And then it holds black ink. When it's rough, it holds ink. And then you scrape, burnish, and smooth it out to pull the light out of it. It's a ridiculously slow process. And for some reason, it's become really popular in the last 20 years. It's some sort of a digital, meaning these digits, response to the digital age. And so all of a sudden, there are hundreds of artists working in mezzotint as a creative medium. And the real confusion, or interesting thing about that, is that when mezzotint was invented, it was not a creative medium. It was used to reproduce paintings, to reproduce royal portraits. And so this medium now is becoming a more creative medium. And I got into it in the 1980s as a means of trying to do less toxic approaches. When I first had children around the house and I wasn't working with acids and solvents and all these things, I was just working by hand. And so I started making these images and I just loved the look of it. The black is so rich, so velvety. It's like legitimate black velvet painting. And so there's just something really attractive about the way it can be used to tell stories for me. And I started making images through the mezzotint medium. And at a certain point, I decided I'm going to try and make one every day, which is unheard of. And I made one every day for about a month. And then I took on a larger series and did one every day for about 100 days and another. And at this point, I've made almost 500, 490 mezzotints, which I think I'm close to, if not the most prolific artist working in mezzotint. So this is sort of a side thing, but now it's become a very major part of my work.
And how large are these?
Most of them are very small. Okay. Size is relevant. So a large mezzotint is 9 by 12. These ones here are 24 by 18, 9 by 12, 9 by 12 essentially, 16 by 12. I've made a few that are 24 by 36.
You didn't do those in a day?
Those take closer to a year, yeah. But one thing about working quickly with a one-a-day approach was that I didn't have to worry about them being a grand metaphor about life. They were just a passing diary entry. And the images would build one after another, after another. So I just donated my entire body of mezzotint work to a museum in Russia, the Ekaterinburg Museum of Art, which is the home of the International Mezzotint Festival. And they are putting together a retrospective of my work there.
And where is that in Russia?
Ekaterinburg is the 4th largest city in Russia. It's in the Ural Mountains, right at the divide of Europe and Asia. And it's where there's a large copper mine, probably the biggest copper mine in the world. And that's one of the industries that underwrites the Mezzotint Festival and why this peculiar museum has decided to take this medium on. So here are some different presentations. Take care, Greg. Of the series, which are done in different size formats, which were exhibited here in the Riffe Gallery, 2 or 3 years ago for the Go Figure exhibit. And so each image is a compilation of anywhere from 9 to 86, I think, different pieces all printed together. The other advantage of working in the multiple here is that I print them individually, one image on a piece of paper, and then I print as many as I can on a sheet of paper, 2 different versions or outcomes from the same plate, copper plate. And so these stories just have developed in a free-form fashion. So I don't want to belabor technique, but technique always comes up. How do these things get here? How do I make these things? And I will show just a little bit of that, but then I'll open it up to questions. So if the questions go in a technical direction or in a conceptual direction, we'll go with it whichever way it goes. Let's see, I guess, well, we just talked about the mezzotint process, so let me start with this here. This was a workshop that I did a couple of years ago. I had a group of 20 students, and I had them all making mezzotints. They were cursing me through the whole workshop. Got some great work out of it, though. Here they are working, rocking the plates for the first, I think, 2 days. They had to rock plates, and so that's back and forth with the tooth tool, digging into the plate. And we don't need to listen to this. I'm not sure how to turn the sound down here. Can't quite hear it, but can't quite turn it off either. So I'll just talk over it, try and drown myself out. So here's the rockers, which have teeth, and then rocking back and forth, then scraping and burnishing the image out of the plate. And so here again is the rocking.
Art, do you start with a drawing?
Yeah, we start with a drawing and then we transfer that to the plate. And the nice thing is, here you can see somebody starting to work in it, and right off the bat you can really see on a mirrored-like surface what you're doing. That doesn't mean it's going to print that way yet, but you can see some immediate results, and you really see this rich image right off the bat. That's what I just said I'm saying it here and it's saying it there.
So the rocky thing is a straight line, or is it a curved line?
It is curved.
It's curved,
And
but
you
it's making
rock
a straight
back
line,
and
isn't
forth.
it?
It makes basically a straight dotted line of grooves in the plate.
So it's almost like pixels.
It is, or like halftone dots, if you
Okay.
want to think of it that way. But also the aquatint process is much the same. It is little tiny dots. If you look very closely, you can see the individual dots, but you stand back just a little bit and you just see the values. So all of these techniques use essentially that same concept in their own ways.
So is the value determined by the depth that's in the metal, and then you put the ink on it and lay that over the whichever surface
The
you're
value is determined by how much you've smoothed it out after you've made it rough. And so you push ink down into the surface. I don't know if we're at that point in the video. And then you wipe the surface clean. And if it's smooth, the ink wipes off. But if it's rough, it holds the ink in spite of your wiping. And that's how you get a range of values.
So are you making a positive or a
You're
negative?
making a positive in this case. Yeah. What you see that looks like will be like.
Okay.
Oh, we're getting a scan thing here. Defer. Okay, so how confusing was that? Did that help illuminate it all about that process? The next one is about color and color printing. So traditionally in printing terms, if you were making a full color image, you would use yellow, red, blue, and black. C, M, Y, and K. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and K, which stands for black somehow. But that means buying 4 sheets of copper and drawing on 4 sheets of copper and then inking up 4 sheets of copper and then lining them up exactly, registering them so that they work together exactly. And that's a very difficult process. And so what I've done, basically learned from my major professor in grad school and taken a little bit further, is to do the whole process just on 2 plates. So in order to do it on 2 plates, what I'm doing is thinking about color in an entirely different way. I'm thinking about any given color existing by being a combination of warm and cool. So I have a warm plate, which has browns, yellows, oranges, reds, and I have a cool plate, which has blacks, blues, purples, greens. And if I'm trying to get a color, let's say this brown right here, it's a balance of something on the warm plate and something on the cool plate. And so in order to balance a warm and cool color, what I will usually do is think in terms of complementary colors. So perhaps a certain percentage of green on the cool plate and a certain percentage of red on the warm plate, and balance those out. And when you look closely at that, it's red and green, which give a sort of simultaneous contrast, or sort of a live flickering of interaction of color. Rather than just putting brown there, which would be kind of dead, it's an active surface. So that's some of the approaches that I use in thinking about how to develop the plates. Once the plates are developed, then I have to develop proper colors to make them work. So this is a demonstration just of the printing of a color etching. The ink is already on the plates here. You'll see this is basically the warm color plate, which has about a dozen different colors on it. And it does have a couple of cool colors as well, a little bit of green, and I think that's about it.
Aren't you hand painting those onto the plate? Is that?
So it's put on by hand and wiped off in each area. And there's many different colors on each plate in specific locations, but it can be repeated over and over again. So now you see the first image, which has yellows, oranges, browns, reds, and a little bit of green. And
How many times can you print that? Just once? Just once?
Just once for each inking.
You don't get a ghost then? That's what people talk about, ghost prints.
Ghost print, yeah, is the ghost print is the residue ink, which could be printed again, but it would be only like 1/10 of the richness. And it's really important to get the full saturation of each color. So now I'm trying to align the second plate, which has blues, greens, and blacks in the same position. It's hard enough just registering two plates together.
Are there no oopses?
Are there what?
Whoopses.
Sorry?
Whoops. Oops.
Are there whoopses?
Is there a trash can? Do you recycle?
There is. There is a trash can.
It doesn't always
And
work.
there, once I get into the additioning, it's pretty stable. I usually don't have too many mistakes at that point.
It's so much easier touching.
And so, yeah, now we can see the first print, yellows and oranges, and the second one has blues and purples, which will layer on top of that. Running back through the press. The whole process takes usually an hour and a half to ink up printage.
Does it have to dry in between?
I'm printing wet on wet here. The swimming images, I did have to let the ink dry in between, which is a nightmare for registration. But this is much easier. This is much more forgiving.
So is this your favorite moment? Can you pull it back?
That's the intention. It can be the worst thing in the world, too, though, when it doesn't work.
Isn't it?
What kind of ink are you using?
It's specifically etching ink, Charbonnel etching inks, which have the best color intensity.
Do you have a reference of what two colors are going to look like on top of each other, like on a color chart print of each? I mean,
I start with, I usually mix up about a dozen colors, and again, this is a very technical thing, but I hope this is not too confusing. Let me see if I can explain it and it makes sense, hopefully. But I've got the two plates, right? I've got the warm plate with its information, I've got the cool plate with its information. So the first thing I will do in trying to find a solution to this puzzle is print them in stripes. I'll print the cool plate in vertical stripes and the warm plate in horizontal stripes. Yellow,
just
orange,
ink
red.
with stripes
Yeah,
in?
just a stripe of ink. And 5 or 6 different colors on each plate, 5 or 6 different colors. And print that together and get a grid print where each rectangle has a different combination of 2 colors. And from that, I might pick one segment. This is starting to work. For some reason, these two colors are articulating well in these two plates. And from that basic starting point, then I will create a palette around each color and start putting the colors in different places. And that helps me to get to a resolve relatively quickly.
Is that your technique, or is that how most people do it?
I have been promoting this technique, and I think a lot of people are starting to pick up on it.
It's like an active color chart.
Yeah.
With the composition that you're working
Right, right. So, yeah, I've been doing demos at conferences, printmaking conferences, and a lot of people are taking these kinds of approaches into relief printing, lithography, different techniques. And so I think it's a versatile shortcut to get around what could otherwise be a daunting process if you're going to print it over and over and over again before you find a good solution. This way I can print, I always say, like, I can print 25 ugly prints at once.
But you have to document the stuff as you go, right?
Right. So I usually have assistants with me keeping track of the mix of each colors and charting it out. So yeah, it's an elaborate process.
Have you ever explored movement by, since you're saying you're using two plates, so like not necessarily having the plates lined up or having the exact same image on each plate? So like one plate would have like a warm color, like the warm colors and like this, the scene, the other plate would have the cool colors in the scene.
So you're talking about something a little bit more abstract, perhaps?
You could say that. So like more, as like in context, I'm an art major at Ohio State, but like in context, like when sometimes like when like in a figure drawing class, you might draw a figure for this much, and then they'll change poses, but you draw that on the same paper. So like exploring like
Right.
like that technically that's movement, but it's not. It's like putting the same figure on the same paper, but
Yeah.
it's two different. Like, you know,
I've been kind of
gestures.
stoically realistic for so long that I don't really play with movement that way. I have been doing, and I don't know if I have any examples of it here to show. I have been doing a lot of double exposure kind of images, which in working on the copper surface is really interesting because it's almost like a hologram. If you tilt it one way, you see one image. If you tilt it another way, you see another image. And so I'm pushing and pulling two totally different images simultaneously and trying to develop a different kind of narrative by this juxtaposition of moments, which for me is very much like, like the trigger of a deja vu. What is it that makes us pull up something from our past? It's recalling a memory or something from the present time, bringing up something from our past experiences. And so in these images, I'm juxtaposing and overlaying two different images at the same time. And I don't think I have any good example on my website to show that, unfortunately. That's something we'll have to work on. This is just one other example of how the many images are sometimes shown. This was at the Dayton Visual Arts Center a couple years ago. And this is what 350 of the little images, all framed and presented as a 30-foot long installation. I'm trying to think now, do I have any of the double exposure things here? I don't think I do. Yeah, it's an oversight. Let's see. All right, time to update the website once again. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions. I hope I haven't confused with technique, but hopefully provided some answers of how the works are created, which makes sense. It's a convoluted kind of process, or different processes, and I never really understood them until I started doing them, and I'm still trying to understand them. But inevitably, when we look at a print, we have different questions about how did it get here, how is it made, where we don't tend to do that with a photograph or with a painting. It just is. But with a print, we always want to know a little bit of the background. It's just natural. So what questions can I answer?
Not ask. I have a million questions.
Okay,
When
great.
did you start this, the rocket? Mezzo, is it
The mezzotint.
Yeah,
I
was
started.
that in college, after college, when you just?
That was after college. My training was great. I had Rhode Island School of Design and University of Wisconsin, which are two of the best printmaking schools in the country. Basically 7 years of printmaking training. Nobody ever went near the mezzotint. But I was, can you show me how to do a mezzotint? Oh, we don't do that. It was not promoted. And it's a curious thing now that I'm teaching and I do mezzotint, and we bring in students all the time who are interested in that. I say, that's great, but that can't be your main focus because it's too slow. You've got to generate more ideas, more images, you've got to generate bigger work. So mezzotint can be part of a healthy, balanced breakfast, but not the entire thing.
So I would think at RISD, they not only want you highly schooled, but make you ready for what? A job, teaching, working as an artist?
And
Because if
in all
mezzotint doesn't seem to be a career path then at RISD, right?
No. And,
So you
well,
thought
you know,
illustration?
anything in the arts is always difficult. I trained in illustration initially.
So that
but
was going to be your bread and butter, maybe?
I thought perhaps, but I liked the slow process. And so, you know, when we had illustration assignments and overnight deadlines, I would always feel dissatisfied with what I had created. And so it was just not for me. I did get a chance to work with some great illustrators while I was there, though. Dave McCauley, who did The Way Things Work, Pyramid, City, Underground, all these iconic books from the 70s. Chris Van Allsburg I didn't work with, but I got to know. He did Jumanji, Polar Express, wonderful illustrated books, and a couple of other great illustrators as well. So I was very intrigued by how illustrations tell stories.
I'm wondering, all of a sudden, are illustrations considered art? We've never had a show.
Well, that's a real big question in itself, yeah. So when I was in school, to critique a piece and say that it was illustrative was like saying it's garbage. So that was a real put down. But there's great works being done in illustration. A lot of my heroes are illustrators, and there's a lot of lousy work being done in the other fine arts fields as well. You can kind of think that a certain percentage of anything is going to be good. The criteria for illustration might be a little bit different. One of the things about illustration is it's usually meant for reproduction rather than being for the work of art by itself. And it's often meant for a purpose of selling something, a product or an idea.
And I want to apologize, we have had two shows, I think, from the Mazza. Shame on
Good.
me. That's illustration, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
But I think of it. So, thank you.
So yeah, illustration's a big influence, and you might not see it, but cartooning is a great love as well. The Billy Ireland Museum is one of my favorite places to go. Go down into the depths of their archives and pull out the original artwork there, which was made for the daily strips and then thrown away. Oh, such great artwork. So yeah, I think it's a matter of what you're interested in. Things that were once thought of as being great artwork are no longer. It's continually changing. Any other questions? You know enough to ask. What was your question?
What do you do? What's your art?
I am a writer. I write things.
There you go.
So I love art shows. I just don't comprehend them.
Uh-huh.
Yours I did, the beach scenes, very obvious to me. And I like that. I liked your city scenes when you showed that also. The rooftops.
I'm really glad they resonated.
Well, then,
What?
tell us about the birds in the pieces that we have. There's a lot of questions
The
about
birds.
birds.
Well, the birds are an inside joke, first of all.
Okay.
Because birds have sort of become an icon of printmaking. They have somehow been used and overused in printmaking for many years. And I think it goes all the way back to Audubon's lithographs. But in contemporary printmaking, there's a kind of a legitimization, I think, that is achieved by putting a bird in it. If you've ever seen the Portlandia,
Put a bird on it.
Put a bird on it. Yeah, what are we going to do with this? Well, I don't know. Well, we'll put a bird on it and it's better. And so I had actually started the drawing for this two-panel aerial suburban scene 3 years ago, I believe, 3 years ago. And I had drawn the buildings and worked out where the shadows are going to be, the shapes, the dark, the light, the positive, the negative. Started making the little vignettes of what the characters are going to be doing. And I actually started drawing on the plates and just had this moment where I said, I've done this before. It's nothing new. I'm not interested in it. I can't pursue it. And so I put it aside. And I just left it sitting on the side of my periphery for about a year. And in the middle of the night, I had a dream, and it was put a bird in it. Some sort of a foreground element, something to bring another narrative level to it. So what are these scenes about? What is this suburban scene about? Well, now it's being seen by these ominous characters floating by who have been around since the age of the dinosaurs and have some perspective on the meaningless of our trivial everyday life.
Are they ravens or vultures?
They're crows. Okay, they're vultures. Whatever you want them to be. So all of a sudden, it became more interesting to me. And then the next stage with this one was that, I've been doing this for 40 years essentially, so I'm a master. I know everything about how to do this. I started drawing this plate. I had drawn it all out. It took about 3 or 4 weeks to do the line drawing, and then bit it in the acid and cleaned off the plate, and there's nothing there. And so I had to redraw it. The second time, there was nothing there. Something was wrong with the process. And so finally, the third time I drew it, it worked properly. But if you can imagine going through this entire drawing 3 times, and the hard part is maintaining interest in it. So if you lose interest in it, it's going to be dead. And so I had to find a new way to sustain the interest as I had to rework the process. But I knew at that point I wanted to see the end result. And so I pursued it. And that was just about a year ago that I was having those problems with it. And I finished the print about 2 months ago. So that was the amount of time it took.
When you rework something that much, do you get outside input or is it all you?
I solicit outside input from everyone around me. I usually have an assistant and who's often just an undergraduate beginning student, and their opinion is as valuable as anyone else's. One of the important things is just to have other fresh eyes, because when you're working on something so intently and so tightly, you lose the big picture quite frequently. So it's always important to have somebody else come in and take a look and state the obvious, which you can be totally oblivious to when you're working on something.
You kick yourself when it's
Can you explain about the acid, how that technique, a little bit about that?
Well, the acid is in a tray. And so when I'm drawing on a plate, I will work with acid-resistant materials. So part of the copper is covered, protected, and part of it is revealed. And then I'll take the plate periodically, put it in the acid, and the acid will eat away a little bit of metal. Then I'll take it out, draw on it some more, put it back in, and the acid will eat away a little bit more. So controlling the time, which controls the value, and working through the whole process can take many months. And then cleaning all of the acid-resistant materials off, and then you just see the image in the copper for the first time.
So you draw in something that's resistant to the acid.
I'm drawing directly on the copper plate.
With what?
Crayons, litho crayons, grease pencils,
Okay.
Sharpie magic marker paint pens.
And the acid doesn't affect them?
The acid won't eat those things. Or even like masking tape, duct tape, any contact paper, anything the acid can't get through, plastics, it won't get through.
Thank you.
And so all of that is viable drawing materials. One other thing I didn't mention, we talked about the window, looking through the traditional window as an approach to realism. And that's sort of, I think, related to the easel. The painter works at an easel, And so this is a window, a horizon line. But I'm working on a table. My plate is on a table like this, and I'm looking down at a 45-degree angle at the image. And so that's partially where these aerial images come from. That is my angle of approach to these images as I'm drawing, looking down at them.
Do you suffer neck pains? Is that a concern? That just came up in the news somewhere. There was some activity, and they said, oh, it might have been looking at our
Don't get
computers.
me started on physical problems.
But you know, it's not a condition of the work, having,
No, well, my problems have been bursitis and tendinitis first
that's
in
not
my
the fault of this.
shoulder from rocking.
Oh, no.
Now I have outbursts of bursitis in my elbows like every couple months, and so yeah, I'm pacing myself and watching and just trying to keep making work, but every once in a while I just have a little flare up and then I'm not doing anything for 3
You'd be
weeks.
like colder than having other people do the work for you.
I wish I could. I always have assistants helping me, but I can never fully turn the work over for someone else to do. Not yet. Maybe I'll keep working on that. Any other questions?
It's probably the end. Okay, I'm going to keep at it even after you're finished. But you see the stoplight in the lower left, the stoplight, the street lamp in the lower left image?
Yeah.
Somebody came up just 2 days ago and said, what up with how long that is?
That's a long cast shadow, isn't it?
That's a very long cast shadow. And she wanted to know why.
It is something that's pretty truthful to the photograph I'd taken. So let's see if we can logically figure that out. It's about
Are you using a drone?
that tall.
Oh, that's
Am I what?
Are you using a drone to take a picture? You said you took a picture. with
Drone.
a
Yeah, photographs. Yeah.
Drone.
Yeah, so I worked in photographs, and the size of that shadow was about like that, which is what, about just over 2 lengths.
Yeah.
So if we measure the height of the building next to it and watch the shadow, it's about 2 lengths. I don't think
She
it's
was fierce about it.
disproportionate. Oh, she's much too long.
But he was asking if you use drone cameras.
Oh, drone cameras.
Yeah, because how do you do that? You don't
I've
like
crashed
that?
a couple of drones. I haven't gotten good at flying them yet. And the drone seems to be problematic in that there are new regulations about drones that they can only have the camera at a certain angle, which lets you see towards the horizon line, and not down at the angle that I want, because what I want is exactly what they don't want you to be able to do, be voyeuristic.
So you said this was a photograph that you worked from?
Yeah.
How did you get that picture?
Window seat in an airplane.
Okay.
And I'm always seeking out the tallest buildings in town and hovering with my camera to see what I can find. Anything else?
Well,
Well,
thanks
thank you.
to everyone for coming out to listen to Art talk about his fascinating process, and thanks for everyone who tuned in on Facebook. Don't forget that even though this was recorded live, it will be available on our Facebook page, and you can share it, you can watch it, you can like and comment and all that great stuff. So let's give a round of applause for Art.